Tonight, we uncover a side of Christmas so familiar that most people never think to question it. A holiday wrapped in lights, songs, and comfort, yet built on centuries of decisions the Vatican rarely explains out loud. Not a hidden conspiracy locked in a vault, but a long and complicated history quietly smoothed into tradition. Dates chosen, stories blended, symbols repurposed, meanings softened, all to turn a disputed feast into a universal season. Christmas did not descend fully formed from heaven. It was shaped by emperors, councils, reformers, artists, wars, and culture itself. What began as a theological claim became a political calendar, a social release, a family ritual, and finally, a global spectacle. And along the way, uncomfortable questions were left unanswered. So before the carols begin, and the story feels too warm to doubt, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because once you see how Christmas was built, you may never hear it the same way again. Christmas is often presented as a simple and ancient celebration, a peaceful night fixed in time where tradition flows unchanged from the birth of Jesus to the modern world. But that image hides a far more complex reality. What most people are never told is not that Christmas is forbidden knowledge, but that its history is layered, debated, revised, and shaped by centuries of decisions made by church leaders trying to guide belief, unity, and power. The Vatican does not hide Christmas, yet it rarely explains how uncertain, political, and unfinished its origins truly are. That silence has allowed myths to grow, filling the gaps where history is quieter than comfort allows. The earliest Christians didn't celebrate Christmas at all. For the first few centuries after Jesus lived, believers focused almost entirely on his death and resurrection. Easter mattered because it represented salvation. Birthdays weren't widely celebrated in Jewish culture, and early Christian writers often viewed them as pagan customs. This means that for a long time, no one knew when Jesus was born, and many did not think it mattered. This simple fact already challenges the idea of Christmas as an original core tradition of Christianity. It was only in the 4th century, after Christianity became legally accepted in the Roman Empire, that church leaders began to fix dates, rituals, and shared calendars. Rome was a society built on public festivals, and religion was deeply tied to time itself. When Christianity moved from persecuted faith to imperial religion, it needed a calendar that could organize belief across vast territories. Christmas slowly emerged inside this process, not as a secret plot, but as a practical solution to unify doctrine and practice. December was already heavy with meaning in the Roman world. Winter symbolized survival, renewal, and cosmic order. Rather than erase existing rhythms of life, Christian leaders reframed them. Over time, the birth of Christ was placed into this season, not because the Church knew the exact date, but because the symbolism fit its theology. Light entering the world during the darkest time of year carried a message people could understand. What makes this history uncomfortable is not that it disproves faith, but that it shows how much choice and interpretation shaped what feels eternal. The Vatican today preserves Christmas as a sacred tradition, focusing on meaning rather than mechanics. Explaining every uncertainty would invite questions that the institution has historically tried to manage rather than encourage. This does not mean deception, but it does mean simplification. Christmas survives because it works. It carries theology, culture, memory, and authority all at once. The story told from pulpits is clean and comforting. The real story is human, slow, and negotiated. Understanding that difference does not destroy Christmas. It reveals it as something built over time, not dropped whole from heaven, and that may be the most powerful truth the tradition quietly contains. Knowing this history allows belief to grow stronger through honesty rather than fear of questions and understanding. For the first generations of Christians, the idea of celebrating the birth of Jesus barely existed. What mattered most was not when Jesus entered the world, but what believers thought he accomplished through his death and resurrection. Easter stood at the center of early Christian life because it represented forgiveness, victory over death, and the promise of salvation. The resurrection was seen as the moment history changed, not the birth. This focus shaped everything from worship to teaching, and for a long time there was little interest in marking a birthday at all. In Jewish tradition, birthdays were rarely celebrated and were often associated with foreign rulers and pagan kings. Early Christians, many of whom were Jewish, inherited this suspicion. To them, honoring a birth could feel worldly, even inappropriate, compared to honoring sacrifice and faithfulness. As Christianity spread through the Roman world in the 1st and 2nd centuries, this mindset remained strong. Early Christian writers such as Origen openly criticized birthday celebrations, pointing out that in Scripture they were usually linked to tyrants rather than holy figures. The Gospels themselves offered no clear date for Jesus' birth, and they did not seem concerned with preserving one. Matthew and Luke focused on meaning, not calendars. Shepherds, angels, and stars carried symbolic weight, while time and season remained vague. Because of this, different Christian communities speculated independently, often arriving at different conclusions. Some placed the birth of Jesus in the spring. Others suggested summer. A few even argued for dates in the autumn. There was no agreement, and more importantly, no urgency to create one. By the 3rd century, curiosity about Jesus' birth began to grow, but it was still far from universal. Scholars, such as Clement of Alexandria, recorded that Christians in Egypt debated multiple possible dates, ranging from late spring to early winter. These discussions were intellectual rather than devotional. They reflected an interest in theology and cosmic symbolism, not public celebration. During this period, some communities observed a feast in early January that combined several events, including the baptism of Jesus, and sometimes his birth. This feast would later be known as Epiphany. It was especially important in Eastern Christian regions, showing how diverse early practice truly was. The turning point came in the 4th century, when Christianity moved from the margins of society to the center of imperial life. After the reign of Constantine, the Church was no longer a persecuted group, meeting in secret. It became an institution responsible for guiding millions of people across vast territories. Shared festivals helped create unity. A common calendar made belief visible and orderly. In this new reality, leaving the birth of Christ undefined became less practical. Yet, even then, Christmas did not instantly appear everywhere. Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria adopted different customs at different times. Some resisted the idea entirely, preferring older traditions. What this forgotten period reveals is that Christmas was not born fully formed. It emerged slowly from debate, diversity, and changing needs. For centuries, Christians lived without a birthday for Jesus, and their faith did not suffer. Understanding this does not weaken Christmas. It shows that belief existed before the holiday. and that meaning came before tradition, shaped by people trying to understand the divine within their own time. The question of why December the 25th became the date for Christmas has followed the Church for centuries, often wrapped in claims of secrecy or hidden motives. The truth is quieter and more complex. December 25th did not appear because early Christians discovered a lost record of Jesus' birth. It appeared because theology, symbolism, and the need for unity slowly converged during a time when Christianity was reshaping itself inside the Roman world. By the early 4th century, the Church faced a practical problem. Christianity had spread across regions with different customs, calendars, and traditions. If belief was to feel shared, time itself had to be shared as well. Choosing dates was not only about memory, but about order. One explanation that gained influence was theological rather than historical. Some early Christian thinkers believed that great prophets died on the same calendar date they were conceived. This idea came from Jewish traditions that viewed time as circular and meaningful rather than random. By this reasoning, Jesus was believed to have been conceived on the same date as his crucifixion. In the Western Church, that date was calculated as late March. If conception occurred in late March, then birth would fall 9 months later in late December. This placed the birth of Jesus around December the 25th. For believers, this was not meant to be scientific proof. It was symbolic logic, connecting the beginning and end of Christ's life into a single divine pattern. At the same time, December 25th already carried weight in the Roman calendar. It fell close to the winter solstice, a moment many cultures marked as the turning point of the year, when days slowly began to grow longer. Light, returning after darkness, held deep meaning in ancient thought. In the Roman Empire, this season included celebrations connected to renewal, hope, and cosmic order. When Christianity became a public religion after the reign of Constantine, it did not exist outside this world. It operated within it. Choosing a date that already felt meaningful helped the new faith speak a language people understood. What is often misunderstood is that this choice was not universal or immediate. While Rome began celebrating Christ's birth on December 25th, by the middle of the 4th century, many Eastern Christian communities continued to observe the Nativity on early January. In places like Egypt and parts of the Eastern Mediterranean, January 6th remained central, combining the celebration of Jesus' birth and baptism. For a long time, both dates existed side by side. This shows that December 25th was not imposed overnight by a single authority. It spread gradually, influenced by Rome's growing prestige and administrative reach. By the end of the 4th century, Rome's customs carried increasing weight across Western Europe. As bishops travelled, councils met, and liturgical books were copied, December 25th became the dominant date in the West. The Eastern Church would later separate the celebrations, keeping January 6th for Epiphany, while also adopting December 25th for the Nativity. This process was slow, negotiated, and shaped by communication rather than force. Understanding why December 25th became Christmas does not reveal a hidden scheme. It reveals a church learning how to organize belief across time. The date was chosen not because it erased truth, but because it created meaning, unity, and stability in a changing world. What feels ancient and fixed today was once flexible, debated, and human. By the time Christianity began to shape its own calendar, Rome already lived by a rhythm of festivals that filled the year with meaning, colour, and public ritual. December in particular was not an empty month waiting for a new religion to claim it. It was already dense with symbolism tied to survival, power, and the movement of the heavens. Romans understood winter not only as a season of cold, but as a test of order against chaos. The days grew shorter, the sun weakened, and yet life endured. This struggle gave December enormous cultural weight long before Christianity ever became legal. One of the most important Roman festivals was Saturnalia, which unfolded in mid-December. It honored Saturn, a god linked to agriculture and a mythical golden age. During this period, normal rules were relaxed. Social roles blurred, gifts were exchanged, feasts were shared, and public joy was encouraged. While Saturnalia was not about light conquering darkness, it was about renewal, abundance, and a temporary return to balance. These themes were deeply embedded in Roman identity. They shaped how people experienced time itself. When Christianity later placed meaning into December, it entered a season already charged with expectation. Another key element was the winter solstice. Although Romans didn't celebrate it in the same scientific way we do today, they recognized the turning of the year. The shortest day marked a threshold. After it passed, daylight slowly returned. This moment symbolized hope. In the later Roman Empire, imperial religion increasingly connected the sun with authority and stability. Emperors were linked to cosmic order. By the 3rd century, the idea of the unconquered sun gained popularity. This was not a single unified cult, but a shared image of strength and continuity during uncertain times. When Christianity emerged from persecution into public life in the 4th century, it did not erase this calendar. It had to live inside it. People still felt December as a season of expectation and renewal. Rather than attempt to strip away these meanings, Christian leaders reframed them. The language of light entering darkness aligned naturally with Christian theology about Christ entering the world. This was not accidental, but it was not deception either. It was adaptation. Religions that survive across empires learn to speak through familiar time markers. What matters historically is that Christian feasts did not appear in a vacuum. Rome already used festivals to teach values, reinforce authority, and unite people. The Church inherited this structure when it inherited the empire. The calendar became a tool of teaching. By placing Christian meaning into an already significant season, belief became easier to share and remember. December did not belong to Christianity, but Christianity learned how to belong to December. This process explains why Christmas feels ancient, yet adaptable, rooted in history while constantly reshaped. It reflects how belief survives by working within culture, not above it, allowing faith to grow familiar without losing meaning for those living through changing times. History moves in straight lines. The idea that Christmas was created by stealing pagan traditions is repeated often, but history shows something more deliberate and more practical. Early Christian leaders weren't scavengers copying rituals out of desperation. They were organizers trying to guide belief across cultures that already lived by seasonal customs. When Christianity moved into public life during the 4th century, it faced a world where time was already meaningful. People marked seasons through food, light, gatherings, and shared rest. These habits did not disappear when belief changed, and the Church understood that forcing people to abandon them would create resistance rather than faith. This approach was not unique to Christianity. Roman religion itself had absorbed gods, symbols, and festivals from conquered cultures for centuries. The empire survived by blending traditions rather than erasing them. Christianity, now operating inside that same empire, adopted a similar strategy. What changed was the message, not the human behavior. When people gathered during winter to share meals or exchange small gifts, church leaders did not ban the actions outright. Instead, they reinterpreted their meaning toward charity, humility, and remembrance of Christ. This method allowed belief to grow without breaking social bonds. Historical writings confirm that this was intentional. Christian thinkers like Augustine argued that customs could be redirected rather than destroyed. If a practice did not directly oppose Christian teaching, it could be reshaped to serve it. The goal was not to preserve pagan belief, but to guide people slowly toward Christian values. This reduced conflict and allowed communities to transition without cultural collapse. It also helped Christianity spread among rural populations, who were deeply attached to seasonal traditions tied to survival. A key misunderstanding comes from confusing form with belief. Lighting candles, marking the solstice, or celebrating survival through winter were not owned by any religion. These were human responses to nature. Christianity did not invent these behaviors, but it did assign them new meaning. Light became a symbol of Christ entering the world. Giving became an act of charity rather than obligation. Rest became sacred instead of merely practical. Over time, these meanings replaced older interpretations without erasing the actions themselves. Calling this process stolen paganism oversimplifies history and removes intention from the people involved. Early Christians believed truth could enter culture without destroying it. This belief shaped how Christmas developed and why it feels both ancient and adaptable. The holiday carries layers of meaning built through centuries of shared human behavior guided toward a theological center. The Vatican today rarely explains this process in detail, not because it is dangerous, but because it is complex. Simpler stories are easier to pass down. Yet, understanding strategic reframing shows how Christianity unified societies without force. Christmas did not erase the past. It absorbed it, reshaped it, and redirected it, creating a shared season that still echoes humanity's oldest rhythms. This history reveals adaptation rather than theft, showing how belief survived by working with culture, not against it, across generations shaped by memory and habit and continuity. The earliest celebrations of Christmas would feel unfamiliar to almost anyone today. There were no decorated trees, no wrapped gifts, no songs about snowmen or flying reindeer. What existed instead was a quiet and serious religious observance shaped by theology, scripture, and discipline. In the 4th and 5th centuries, when Christmas began to take form in parts of the Christian world, it was not designed as a joyful family holiday. It was a sacred reminder of doctrine focused on the mystery of God becoming human. For early believers, Christmas was less about comfort and more about meaning. In Rome and other Western Christian centers, Christmas developed as a liturgical feast. This meant it was structured around church services, specific readings from scripture, prayers, and sermons. The emphasis was on the incarnation, the belief that Jesus was both fully divine and fully human. This idea was central to Christian identity, and also a source of major debate at the time. Celebrating the birth of Christ helped reinforce official teachings, against rival interpretations that questioned his nature. Christmas, in this sense, was theological reinforcement as much as devotion. In some regions, Christmas was also connected to fasting rather than feasting. While modern Christmas is often associated with indulgence, early Christian calendars sometimes treated the days leading up to Christmas as a period of restraint. In parts of the East, believers fasted before the Nativity, in a way similar to Lent, before Easter. This practice highlighted spiritual preparation over celebration. Even in the West, where fasting rules were less strict, Christmas itself was surrounded by an atmosphere of reverence rather than excess. Church services during early Christmases were long and symbolic. Scripture readings focused on passages from the Gospels of Luke and John, emphasizing the birth narrative and the idea of divine light entering the world. Hymns were theological statements set to music, not casual songs. Midnight services developed slowly and were meant to mark the transition from darkness to light, both physically and spiritually. These gatherings were communal but solemn, centered on listening rather than spectacle. What is especially important to understand is that many things now considered essential to Christmas simply did not exist yet. There was no Santa figure. Gift-giving, when it occurred, was tied more closely to charity and almsgiving than to children or family exchange. Decorations were minimal and often symbolic rather than decorative. Even nativity scenes, now common in churches and homes, did not become widespread until the medieval period. The earliest Christians did not reenact the birth visually. They reflected on it verbally and intellectually. This early form of Christmas reveals how much the holiday has changed over time. It began as a church-centered observance shaped by belief, debate, and discipline. Joy was present, but it was restrained and inward. Understanding this helps explain why Christmas could later absorb cultural customs so easily. The foundation wasn't built on celebration for its own sake, but on meaning that could later be expressed in many forms. The first Christmases were not warm and festive as we imagine them. They were serious, structured, and focused on defining what Christians believed about Jesus and why that belief mattered in a changing world. To understand Christmas fully, you have to understand the power of the church calendar. In the ancient and medieval world, time was not something people owned individually. It was something communities shared, and whoever organized time shaped daily life. As Christianity grew into a dominant institution, the church did not only teach beliefs, it structured the year itself. Weeks, seasons, fasts, and feasts created a rhythm that guided how people worked, rested, gathered, and remembered. Christmas became one of the clearest examples of how controlling time could quietly shape society without force. Before widespread clocks and printed calendars, most people learned what day it was through the church. Sundays marked rest and worship. Holy days marked memory. Seasons like Advent, Christmas, Lent, and Easter divided the year into emotional and spiritual phases. This system reached far beyond churches. Markets adjusted, courts paused, travel slowed, and labor changed according to the liturgical cycle. When Christmas was placed into this structure, it became more than a celebration. It became a fixed point in time that everyone shared, regardless of class or region. The church calendar worked because it repeated. Every year, the same readings returned. The same themes resurfaced. Over time, memory became expectation. People did not need to read theology books to understand Christian teaching. Time itself taught them. Christmas arrived after Advent, a season of waiting. That waiting reinforced the idea of hope and preparation. The arrival of Christmas reinforced the message of fulfillment. Even those who barely understood doctrine absorbed it through repetition. The calendar turned belief into habit. This system also gave the Church stability and authority. By defining sacred time, it defined normal time. Days without feasts felt ordinary. Days with feasts felt meaningful. Over generations, this shaped how people understood history and their place in it. Christmas marked not just the birth of Jesus, but the idea that time itself had direction. Before Christ and after Christ became a way of thinking, even before formal dating systems fully spread. The calendar quietly taught that history had a center. What made this powerful was that it felt natural. The Church didn't need to argue constantly. The calendar spoke for it. Even political rulers aligned themselves with feast days, attending major services on Christmas and Easter to signal legitimacy. Authority and sacred time reinforced each other. When people gathered for Christmas, they were not just celebrating faith. They were participating in a shared schedule that linked village life to empire-wide belief. Christmas also shows how flexible this system could be. While the core feast remained fixed, local customs grew around it. Foods, songs, and traditions varied, but the date anchored them. This allowed diversity without fragmentation. Everyone celebrated Christmas, even if they celebrated it differently. The calendar held the structure, while culture filled in the details. The Vatican today still operates within this system. Even in a modern world with digital clocks and global schedules, the church calendar continues to guide worship and meaning. Christmas remains powerful, not because of mystery or secrecy, but because it is embedded in time itself. It arrives every year, teaching the same message through repetition. The Church understood early on that controlling belief did not require constant explanation. It required control of rhythm. Christmas stands as proof that when you shape time, you shape memory, behavior, and identity across centuries, quietly and effectively, without ever needing to raise your voice. Most people imagine the Nativity as a single clear story, stable and unchanging, passed directly from the Bible into tradition. But when you look closely at the gospel texts themselves, that unified image begins to dissolve. The birth of Jesus is described only in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and even there, the details are different, sometimes strikingly so. What feels like one seamless biblical account is actually the result of centuries of harmonization, where separate narratives were blended into a single story that could be easily taught, remembered, and celebrated. Matthew's account is focused on kingship, prophecy, and danger. He tells of wise men from the east following a star, of King Herod fearing a rival, and of a family forced to flee into Egypt. Angels speak through dreams, and the tone is tense and political. Luke's account, on the other hand, is quiet and pastoral. Shepherds receive angelic messages. Mary reflects silently, and the story unfolds among ordinary people rather than royal courts. There are no wise men in Luke, no flight to Egypt, and no violent ruler hunting a child. These are not small differences. They reflect different theological goals and audiences. Early Christians were aware of these differences, but they did not see them as a problem. Each gospel was valued for the message it carried. Trouble arose when Christianity became more organized and public. As the church grew, it needed clear teaching tools. Multiple versions of the same event created confusion, especially among new believers who did not read Scripture for themselves. Over time, teachers, preachers, and artists began to combine elements from both accounts into a single narrative. Shepherds and wise men appeared together. The star hovered above the stable. Angels announced the birth to everyone at once. This version was easier to tell and easier to remember. By the 4th century, harmonized nativity stories were becoming common in sermons and hymns. The Church did not formally rewrite the Gospels, but it allowed tradition to smooth their edges. Liturgical readings selected specific passages that supported a unified message. Art and drama reinforced this blended version. Nativity plays, which emerged later in the medieval period, further locked these details together in the public imagination. Once people saw the story performed, it felt fixed and complete. This process did not come from deception. It came from a desire for clarity. The Vatican and the wider Church prioritized unity in belief, especially in an age when literacy was rare. A single clear story served that purpose better than two parallel ones. Over time, the harmonized nativity became more familiar than the biblical texts themselves. Many believers grew up never realizing that the shepherds and the wise men never appear together in Scripture. What this reveals is not a hidden agenda, but a pattern. Christianity often chose simplicity over complexity when teaching large populations. The cost of that simplicity was nuance. The benefit was shared understanding. The Nativity as we know it today is not false, but it is curated. It reflects theological choices made to emphasize meaning rather than historical precision. Understanding this does not strip the story of value. It adds depth. It shows how tradition grows through interpretation, not just preservation. The Nativity is not a photograph of a single night. It is a mosaic built from multiple texts, shaped by centuries of teaching. Recognizing that process allows people to see the Bible and the Church as human institutions, engaging with sacred ideas, balancing truth, memory, and meaning in a world that always demands clarity over complexity. Midnight Mass feels ancient and unchanging, as if Christians have always gathered in the darkness to welcome Christmas together. In reality, this tradition rose quietly over time, shaped by Rome's growing influence and the Church's effort to give structure and unity to worship across Western Europe. In the earliest centuries, there was no single standard way to celebrate Christmas. Different regions prayed differently, met at different times, and emphasized different parts of Scripture. Midnight Mass emerged not from a command, but from gradual practice that Rome refined and others slowly adopted. In the 4th century, as Christmas became established in Rome, church leaders began organizing multiple services around the feast. Historical records show that by the late 4th and early 5th centuries, Rome observed 3 distinct Christmas liturgies. One was held during the night, one at dawn, and one during the day. Each had its own scripture readings and theological focus. The night service emphasized the mystery of Christ's birth in darkness. The dawn service focused on light spreading into the world. The day service centered on the eternal nature of Christ. This structure allowed worshippers to experience the meaning of Christmas through time itself. The night service, which would later be known as Midnight Mass, carried powerful symbolism. Gathering while it was still dark echoed the belief that Christ entered the world quietly, unseen, while humanity waited in spiritual night. This was not meant as drama, but as teaching. Most people could not read theology, but they could feel symbolism. Walking into a church lit by candles in the middle of the night made the message physical and memorable. As Rome's authority grew during the early Middle Ages, its liturgical customs spread outward. Bishops trained in Rome carried these practices back to their regions. Monasteries copied Roman liturgical books. Over time, what Rome practiced began to feel normal and correct across Western Europe. Midnight Mass was not forced upon communities, but it became a model of proper worship. Aligning with Rome also meant aligning with legitimacy and unity within the Church. By the early medieval period, Midnight Mass had become a widely recognized part of Christmas in the West. Kings and nobles attended it publicly, signaling both piety and political loyalty. For ordinary people, it became a rare moment of nighttime gathering, which gave it emotional weight. In a world without artificial lighting, night carried mystery and danger. Coming together in church transformed that fear into shared meaning. What is important to understand is that Midnight Mass was never just about the hour. It was about order. It placed Christmas within a precise rhythm of worship that the Church could repeat year after year. This repetition created stability in a world often marked by uncertainty. Even as local customs varied, the core liturgy remained recognizable. The Vatican today presents Midnight Mass as a timeless tradition, but its true power lies in how slowly and effectively it was standardized. Rome did not erase local worship. It offered a model that others chose to follow. Midnight Mass became a shared experience that linked villages, cities, and kingdoms into one calendar and one memory. It stands as a reminder that some of the most influential traditions in Christianity were not announced loudly. They spread quietly, through repetition, symbolism, and the authority of example, shaping how millions experienced Christmas without ever needing explanation. By the medieval period, Christmas had moved far beyond scripture and liturgy and became deeply tied to physical places, objects, and visible proof of holiness. This was the age of relics and pilgrimage, when faith was not only believed, but touched, seen, and travelled toward. The nativity story became anchored to geography, especially to Bethlehem, which transformed Christmas into more than a date on a calendar. It became a destination, a source of authority, and a tool for legitimacy in a world where power and faith were tightly connected. Bethlehem held immense symbolic weight because it was believed to be the actual birthplace of Jesus. By the 4th century, after Christianity gained imperial support, churches were built over sites associated with Christ's life. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem became one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in the Christian world. Traveling there was seen as an act of devotion, but also as a way to connect directly with sacred history. In a time when few people could read, place mattered more than text. Standing where Christ was believed to have been born made the Nativity feel real and immediate. Relics strengthened this connection. Pieces of cloth, fragments of stone, and objects associated with the birth of Jesus were collected, displayed, and venerated. One of the most famous examples was the relics believed to be pieces of the manger, later housed in Rome. These relics linked distant churches to Bethlehem itself. A church that possessed a nativity relic gained prestige. It became a local center of Christmas devotion, drawing pilgrims and donations. In this way, Christmas fueled both spiritual life and economic activity. Pilgrimage during the medieval period was not only personal devotion, it was political and social. Kings, nobles, and bishops supported holy sites to demonstrate their faith and authority. Sponsoring churches connected to the Nativity allowed rulers to claim closeness to Christ's origins. Christmas thus became a powerful symbol of legitimacy. If a ruler could associate himself with Bethlehem or its relics, he appeared chosen, blessed, and rightful in the eyes of the people. The Vatican played a central role in organizing and validating this system. Rome became a hub where relics were authenticated and displayed. Christmas celebrations in Rome drew pilgrims from across Europe, reinforcing the city's status as the heart of Western Christianity. The Nativity was no longer just remembered. It was managed through places, objects, and approved devotion. This gave the Church enormous influence over how Christmas was understood and experienced. What often goes unspoken is how deeply this shaped identity. Medieval Christians did not just believe in the Nativity, they located themselves within it. Pilgrimage routes mapped faith onto the land. Relics turned belief into physical presence. Christmas became something you could move toward, touch, and see, not just hear about. This system also reinforced unity. Shared devotion to Bethlehem and its relics connected distant regions under a single story. Even those who would never travel knew that the center existed. Christmas became a point of reference that tied village churches to the wider Christian world. By the late Middle Ages, Christmas was firmly embedded in this network of sacred geography. It was no longer only a feast. It was an engine of memory, authority, and belonging. Understanding this reveals how the Nativity shaped not just belief, but power, movement, and identity across centuries, quietly pulling the Christian world toward a shared center, anchored in place as much as in faith. By the High Middle Ages, Christmas had changed its voice. What began as a quiet and theological feast became loud, crowded, and deeply woven into everyday life. Across Europe, Christmas expanded beyond church walls into streets, homes, and public squares. Feasting replaced fasting. Music replaced silence. Laughter mixed with prayer. This transformation was not planned by the Church, but it unfolded as Christianity settled into society and people made the season their own. Christmas became a space where official religion and popular culture collided. Feasting became central to medieval Christmas. After long periods of labor and limited food, the winter feast carried real importance. Animals were slaughtered, bread was baked in abundance, and ale flowed freely. These meals were not just indulgence. They reinforced social bonds and survival. Christmas marked a moment when scarcity briefly loosened its grip. The Church tolerated this excess because it understood the pressure of medieval life. Yet it also worried about what feasting could lead to. Drunkenness, disorder, and moral lapses often followed, and clergy repeatedly warned against turning a holy feast into chaos. Public performances flourished during the Christmas season. Mystery plays and nativity dramas appeared in town squares and churchyards. These plays retold biblical stories in simple language so ordinary people could understand them. Over time, they grew more theatrical, humorous, and local. Biblical characters spoke like villagers, serious moments mixed with comedy. While these plays helped spread Christian teaching, they also slipped beyond clerical control. The line between instruction and entertainment blurred, and church leaders sometimes criticized the performances for being irreverent. One of the most unsettling traditions for church authorities was misrule. During the Christmas season, normal hierarchies could temporarily flip. Servants mocked masters, students elected mock bishops, lords tolerated behaviour that would be punished the rest of the year. These customs weren't meant to overthrow order permanently. They released tension in a rigid society. For a short time, laughter replaced fear. The church allowed some of this because banning it entirely risked rebellion. Still, many clergy viewed misrule as dangerous, fearing it weakened respect for authority. Folk customs also grew alongside official celebration. Carols spread from churches into homes and fields. Evergreens were brought indoors as symbols of life during winter. Local legends blended with Christian meaning. These traditions varied widely by region and often had little direct approval from Rome. Christmas became impossible to standardize fully. People celebrated it in ways that reflected their environment and history, not just doctrine. The Vatican and local bishops tried repeatedly to guide and restrain these practices. Sermons warned against excess. Councils issued reminders about proper behavior. Yet Christmas resisted full control. Its timing, during darkness and cold, invited emotion. Its message of joy invited expression. Once the season became associated with relief, laughter, and shared abundance, it could not be reduced to quiet worship alone. This period reveals something important about Christmas. It is not only shaped from the top down, it grows from the ground up. Medieval Christmas became loud because people needed it to be. The church learned to live with this noise, sometimes embracing it, sometimes resisting it, but never fully mastering it. Christmas survived not because it was controlled perfectly, but because it allowed space for human joy, disorder, and tradition to exist alongside belief. That tension would define the holiday for centuries to come. St. Nicholas began as a real historical figure, a Christian bishop living in the city of Myra in the eastern Mediterranean during the late 3rd and early 4th centuries. Very little is known about his life with certainty, but stories of his generosity spread quickly after his death. He was remembered for defending the poor, protecting children, and secretly giving gifts to those in need. These stories weren't created by the Vatican as a grand plan. They spread through popular devotion, carried by ordinary people who found hope in the image of a quiet protector during harsh times. As Christianity expanded across Europe, devotion to St. Nicholas travelled with it. By the early Middle Ages, churches dedicated to him appeared from Italy to Germany to England. His feast day, celebrated in early December, became especially important in Northern Europe. Children were central to his legend. Tales described him leaving coins in shoes, saving the innocent, and rewarding good behaviour. These stories fit perfectly into the growing Christmas season, even though they were not originally tied to the Nativity. Over time, St. Nicholas became a bridge between sacred belief and everyday life. What made St. Nicholas powerful was that people shaped him themselves. Local customs transformed his image. In some regions, he appeared as a kindly bishop. In others, he travelled with companions who punished misbehaviour. His role changed depending on culture, climate, and social needs. The Church recognized his sainthood, but it could not fully control how people celebrated him. Parents, communities, and schools turned St. Nicholas into a moral guide long before formal church rules could define him. This rapid spread created tension. Church leaders valued St. Nicholas as a model of charity, but they worried about excess superstition and uncontrolled folk practices. Gift-giving, especially to children, began to overshadow theological focus. Still, attempts to limit devotion rarely succeeded. St. Nicholas had become emotionally important. He made faith feel personal. He showed kindness without sermons. That kind of devotion spreads faster than official teaching. By the late medieval period, St. Nicholas celebrations were deeply embedded in European culture. In schools, students elected a boy bishop to rule briefly in his honor. In towns, processions and gift rituals took place. These customs often existed at the edge of church approval. They were rarely banned outright, but they were never fully regulated. Rome could canonize saints, but it could not dictate imagination. This pattern reveals how Christmas culture evolved. Not everything came from councils or papal decisions. Much of it came from below, shaped by fear, hope, and family life. St. Nicholas became a symbol people trusted more than institutions. He did not judge doctrine. He rewarded kindness. That made him powerful. Centuries later, these regional traditions would blend, migrate, and eventually transform into the modern gift giver known today. But even in his earliest forms, St. Nicholas showed how quickly popular devotion could reshape religion. The Vatican could recognize holiness, but it could not stop people from filling that holiness with their own meaning. St. Nicholas became a cultural wildfire because he answered human needs faster than official structures ever could. He proved that belief survives not only through authority, but through stories people choose to keep alive. As Christmas grew louder and more public during the Middle Ages, the Church increasingly found itself trying to manage a celebration it no longer fully controlled. What had once been a solemn feast centered on theology had become a season of excess, noise, and local custom. Clergy across Europe worried that Christmas was drifting too far from its spiritual purpose. Records from church councils, sermons, and letters show repeated efforts to discipline the celebration, not because the church rejected joy, but because it feared losing authority over meaning. One of the main concerns was excess. Feasting often turned into drunkenness, gambling, and violence. Christmas was one of the few times ordinary people could relax strict social rules, and many pushed those boundaries. Bishops warned that behavior during holy days reflected the soul's condition. If Christmas became a time of chaos, it threatened the moral order the Church worked to maintain. Sermons from the medieval period frequently reminded believers that celebrating Christ's birth did not excuse sin. Superstition also troubled church leaders. Folk practices often blended Christian language with older local beliefs. Charms, fortune-telling, and rituals meant to predict the coming year appeared during the Christmas season. Some communities believed spirits were active during the long nights of winter. While these practices gave people a sense of control in an uncertain world, clergy saw them as dangerous distractions from faith. Councils issued warnings against divination and magical thinking, especially when they appeared during sacred feasts. Another point of tension was misrule. Mock bishops, role reversals, and public parody of authority were tolerated to a degree, but they made church leaders uneasy. These customs blurred respect for hierarchy. While temporary disorder could release social pressure, it also risked normalizing disrespect. Attempts were made to limit how far misrule could go, especially within church spaces. some cathedrals banned certain festivities outright, while others tried to move them outside sacred buildings. The Vatican and local bishops faced a difficult balance. Banning popular customs entirely often failed and sometimes caused backlash. Allowing everything weakened discipline. The solution was often selective tolerance. Practices that could be given Christian meaning were allowed. Those that resisted reinterpretation were discouraged or quietly condemned. This created a Christmas that looked different from place to place, shaped by negotiation rather than command. What is revealing is that these struggles continued for centuries. Christmas never settled into a fully controlled form. Each generation reinvented parts of it. The Church issued reminders, adjusted rules, and adapted preaching, but it rarely achieved complete uniformity. This shows that Christmas was not simply handed down by authority. It was contested and shaped by ordinary people. The Vatican's difficulty in managing Christmas exposes a deeper truth. The holiday succeeded because it met human needs beyond doctrine. It allowed release, hope, and shared joy during the hardest season of the year. The Church could guide that energy, but it could not erase it. Christmas survived because it lived in the space between belief and behavior, where control gives way to tradition. This tension did not weaken Christmas, it made it durable. By struggling to discipline the party, the Church learned that faith endured best when it could breathe. Christmas became a season where authority and popular culture collided, negotiated, and ultimately coexisted. That uneasy balance remains part of the holiday's power even today. When the Protestant Reformation erupted in the 16th century, Christmas faced one of the most serious challenges in its history. Reformers did not just question the authority of the Pope. They questioned everything that lacked clear grounding in Scripture, and Christmas quickly fell under suspicion. The Bible did not command believers to celebrate the birth of Jesus on a specific day. It did not mention December the 25th. For many reformers, that absence mattered deeply. If a practice couldn't be justified directly from Scripture, it was seen as human invention rather than divine command. Martin Luther held a complex view. He did not reject Christmas outright and continued to preach about the birth of Christ. However, he criticized excess, superstition, and the way the Church had layered tradition over Scripture. Other reformers were far less tolerant. Figures such as John Calvin and later Puritan leaders believed Christmas had become corrupted by Catholic ritual and popular disorder. To them, the holiday represented everything they were trying to escape. It symbolized church authority replacing biblical simplicity. In regions influenced by strict Protestant thought, Christmas celebrations were reduced or eliminated. In parts of Switzerland, Scotland, and the Netherlands, Christmas lost its status as a major feast. In England during the 17th century, Puritan leaders went even further. They argued that Christmas encouraged idleness, drunkenness, and false worship. During the English Civil War, Parliament passed laws restricting Christmas observance. Shops were ordered to remain open. Public celebrations were discouraged. Soldiers were sent to stop festive gatherings. For a time, celebrating Christmas could be seen as an act of defiance. This rejection revealed something important. Christmas was not universally accepted even within Christianity. Its authority depended on tradition as much as belief. Protestants who followed the principle of Scripture alone saw Christmas as optional at best and dangerous at worst. They pointed out that early Christians had lived without it for centuries. To them, removing Christmas was a return to purity, not a loss. The Catholic Church responded by defending Christmas as part of sacred tradition. The Council of Trent reaffirmed the authority of the Church to establish feasts and guide worship beyond explicit biblical commands. In Catholic regions, Christmas became a marker of identity. Celebrating it was not just religious, it was political. It signaled loyalty to Rome in a divided Europe. Pageantry, art, and music flourished as Catholics emphasized what Protestants rejected. This split showed how fragile Christmas really was. It survived not because it was unquestioned, but because people fought over it. In places where it was banned, many ordinary people continued to observe it quietly. Old habits proved difficult to erase. Even when laws changed, memory remained. Over time, Christmas slowly returned to Protestant regions, reshaped to fit new beliefs. Emphasis shifted toward family, scripture reading, and moral reflection. The Reformation shock exposed the truth behind the holiday. Christmas was not guaranteed by scripture alone. It existed because communities chose to keep it. That choice could be challenged, suspended, and revived. The Vatican did not hide this conflict, but it rarely highlights how close Christmas came to disappearing in large parts of Europe. Understanding this moment reveals how contested the holiday truly was. Christmas survived division because it adapted, proving that tradition is not fixed, but negotiated across belief, power, and time. In Catholic regions shaken by the Reformation, Christmas became more than a religious feast. It became a declaration. As Protestant movements rejected traditional holy days, Catholic leaders responded by strengthening them. Christmas was no longer just about remembering the birth of Christ. It became a visible marker of loyalty to Rome, tradition, and authority. In a divided Europe, how and whether you celebrated Christmas said something about who you were and where you stood. After the Council of Trent in the mid-16th century, the Catholic Church launched a wide effort to clarify doctrine and reinforce identity. This movement, often called the Counter-Reformation, placed great emphasis on visible devotion. Art, music, architecture, and ritual were used to teach faith to the senses. Christmas fit perfectly into this strategy. Nativity scenes became more detailed and widespread. Churches filled with imagery of the birth of Christ, designed to move emotion as much as intellect. The goal was not subtle theology. It was clarity, beauty, and presence. Catholic rulers supported this emphasis. In places like Italy, Spain, Austria, and parts of France, Christmas celebrations became grand public events. Processions, elaborate masses, and public displays reinforced the idea that Catholicism was alive, joyful, and ordered. Where Protestant regions simplified worship, Catholic regions made it visible and rich. This contrast was intentional. Christmas became a way to show that tradition had not weakened faith, but strengthened it. Music played a major role. Composers created elaborate Christmas masses and hymns that filled cathedrals with sound. These works were not entertainment alone. They were theology set to music, meant to stir belief. Ordinary people might not understand doctrinal debates, but they could feel belonging through shared celebration. Christmas united communities emotionally during a time of fear and division. The Church also encouraged domestic devotion. Nativity scenes entered homes, allowing families to participate in Catholic identity daily. This was especially important where Protestant ideas threatened to spread. Teaching children through visual tradition anchored belief early. Christmas thus became part of education, shaping memory before argument. This response was not only religious, it was cultural. Catholic leaders understood that removing beloved traditions risked alienating people. Instead, they leaned into them. By giving Christmas deeper meaning and stronger presence, they turned it into a shield against reform. Celebrating Christmas became an act of resistance against Protestant criticism. What is rarely emphasized is how successful this strategy was. Christmas survived the Reformation not by shrinking, but by growing. In Catholic regions, it became more structured, more artistic, and more central to identity. The Vatican did not simply defend doctrine through words, it defended it through experience. This period shows that Christmas is not neutral. It carries messages about authority and belonging. The Catholic response transformed the holiday into a symbol of continuity in a fractured world. By doubling down on devotion, the Church ensured that Christmas remained not just remembered, but felt. And in that feeling, identity took root, lasting long after the battles of the Reformation faded from memory. When people think about calendars, they imagine neutral tools that simply track the passage of days. History tells a different story. The calendar that most of the world uses today was shaped by religious authority, political power, and the need to control sacred time. Christmas sits at the center of this story. The decision of what day Christmas falls on, and even what year it belongs to, has never been purely scientific. It has always been tied to who had the authority to define time itself. For centuries, Europe followed the Julian calendar, introduced under Julius Caesar in the 1st century before Christ. While advanced for its time, the Julian calendar slowly drifted out of alignment with the solar year. This meant that seasons and feast days gradually shifted. By the 16th century, the spring equinox was occurring earlier than it should have, throwing off the calculation of Easter and disturbing the entire liturgical cycle. Christmas, while fixed by date, was part of a system that was no longer aligned with the heavens. This problem was not small. The church calendar depended on precise timing. Feasts, fasts, and seasons were interconnected. If the calendar slipped, theology slipped with it. After years of debate, Pope Gregory XIII authorized a reform. In the year 1582, a new calendar was introduced. 10 days were removed to realign the calendar with the solar year. The day after October 4th became October 15th. Time itself jumped forward. This decision proved that calendars are not just about astronomy. They are about authority. Catholic countries adopted the new calendar quickly. Protestant and Orthodox regions resisted. Some saw the reform as a papal power grab rather than a correction. As a result, different parts of Europe lived on different dates for decades, even centuries. Christmas was celebrated on different days, depending on political and religious allegiance. What day it was depended on who you obeyed. The Vatican understood the stakes. By defining the calendar, it defined sacred rhythm. Christmas, Easter, and every holy day fell into place under Rome's authority. This reinforced unity within Catholic regions, while deepening division with others. Even today, some Eastern Christian churches celebrate Christmas in early January, following older calendar calculations. This is not a difference in belief, but in timekeeping. The Gregorian reform also shaped how people understood history. Dating systems became standardized. The idea of before Christ and after Christ became more widely accepted. Time itself was framed around Christian belief. This was not accidental. It reinforced the idea that history revolved around Christ. Christmas became not just a feast, but a reference point in the structure of time. What often goes unexplained is how deeply this affected daily life. Farmers, merchants, courts, and schools all adjusted to the new calendar. Contracts changed, birthdays shifted, festivals moved. Some people believed days had been stolen from their lives. Riots broke out in certain regions. All of this happened because the church decided time needed correction. Christmas survived this upheaval because it was anchored to authority. Once fixed in the new calendar, it gained even more stability. The reform showed that sacred time could be adjusted, but only by those with power. The Vatican did not merely observe Christmas, it protected its place in time. This chapter of history proves something essential. Time is not only measured, it is governed. When the Church changed the calendar, it demonstrated that deciding what day it is can shape belief, identity, and obedience. Christmas stands as living proof that even the calendar is a product of history, power, and human decision, quietly guiding the world one day at a time. As Europe moved out of the medieval world and into early modern society, Christmas slowly shifted from being mainly a church-centered feast to becoming a public and national event. Religion remained important, but politics, monarchy, and social order began to shape how Christmas was celebrated and why it mattered. The Nativity was still preached from pulpits, yet outside the church, Christmas started to serve another purpose. It became a symbol of stability in a changing world, one that rulers and governments learned to use carefully. By the 17th and 18th centuries, European states were becoming more centralized. Kings and queens needed shared customs that could unite populations across regions, languages, and classes. Christmas was ideal for this role. It was already familiar. It carried emotional weight. It brought people together at the same time every year. Monarchs attended Christmas services publicly, not just as believers, but as symbols of national unity. Their presence sent a message that political authority and sacred time were aligned. In many countries, Christmas traditions became tied to the identity of the nation itself. In England, after periods of suppression, Christmas returned as a marker of social order following political turmoil. In France, royal courts emphasized Christmas rituals as part of state ceremony. In Germany, Christmas customs were increasingly linked to family life and cultural identity rather than strict church observance. These differences did not weaken Christmas, they reshaped it. The holiday became a mirror reflecting national values more than universal theology. Public order also played a role. Governments learned that allowing controlled celebration reduced unrest. Designated holidays gave people permission to rest, gather, and release tension without rebellion. Christmas became part of this system. Markets closed, courts paused, schools broke. This rhythm gave structure to the year and helped authorities manage populations. The church still provided meaning, but the state provided regulation. As literacy increased and printed materials spread, Christmas became more standardized within national borders. Songs, poems, and later newspapers reinforced local versions of the holiday. What people thought of as traditional Christmas often came from recent sources shaped by culture, rather than ancient doctrine. Nativity remained present, but it shared space with national symbols, folk heroes, and royal imagery. The Vatican watched this transformation with mixed interest. On one hand, Christmas remained a Christian feast anchored in the birth of Christ. On the other hand, much of its meaning was now being shaped outside Rome. The Church no longer controlled how Christmas looked in daily life. Governments, writers, and families filled that space. Christmas was no longer only sacred time, it was civic time. This shift explains why Christmas today feels both religious and cultural. Its power comes from this blend. People who rarely attend church still feel Christmas matters. That feeling did not happen by accident. It was built over centuries as Christmas moved from nativity to nation. What is often left unsaid is that Christmas survived modernization because it adapted. It allowed itself to become a shared pause in public life. Theology gave it origin, but culture gave it endurance. As Europe modernized, Christmas stopped belonging only to the church and began belonging to society itself. And once a tradition becomes national, it becomes far harder to remove, because it no longer lives only in belief, but in identity, memory, and shared time. Many people believe the Christmas they know today is ancient, passed down unchanged from medieval times. The truth is far more recent. Much of what feels timeless about Christmas was shaped during the 18th and 19th centuries, when social change, industrial life, and modern media transformed the holiday. This was the period when Christmas became domestic, emotional, and centered on the home. The Vatican did not invent this version, but it watched as Christmas quietly shifted away from church dominance and into private life. Before this era, Christmas customs varied widely. Some regions celebrated loudly, others barely at all. There was no single image of Christmas. The rise of the middle class changed that. As people moved into cities and factory schedules replaced agricultural rhythms, winter became harder emotionally. Christmas filled that gap. Families needed a moment of warmth, rest, and identity. Writers, artists, and publishers responded by shaping a Christmas that felt safe and comforting. Printed Christmas cards appeared in the 19th century and quickly spread. They did not come from ancient tradition. They came from new printing technology and rising literacy. Images of snow-covered villages, candlelit windows, and happy families created a shared visual language. These images taught people what Christmas was supposed to feel like. Over time, repetition turned invention into tradition. The Christmas tree followed a similar path. While evergreens had appeared in earlier customs, the decorated indoor tree became widespread only in the 19th century. It spread through royal influence, especially after Queen Victoria and Prince Albert popularized it in Britain. Newspapers printed images of the royal family around the tree, and imitation followed. What felt ancient was actually modern fashion reinforced by media. Domestic rituals also grew stronger. Gift-giving moved into the home and focused on children. This was a shift from earlier charity-based giving. Childhood itself was being redefined during this period as something protected and sentimental. Christmas adapted to that change. The holiday became a stage for innocence and family unity. The church remained present, but it was no longer the main architect of Christmas meaning. Sermons mattered less than songs and stories. Writers like Charles Dickens shaped Christmas more powerfully than theologians. His vision of generosity, warmth, and moral renewal spread faster than doctrine ever could. This new Christmas did not reject Christianity, but it softened it. The Vatican rarely emphasizes how recent many traditions are because age gives authority. Ancient feels unquestionable. modern feels optional. Yet this invented Christmas proved incredibly durable. It crossed religious boundaries. People who did not share belief still shared the season. Understanding this does not cheapen Christmas. It explains its strength. Traditions survive when they adapt to real human needs. The Christmas people call traditional today is a product of modern life responding to cold work and isolation. It feels ancient because it works. And because it works, it has become memory. Over time, memory becomes truth, and invention becomes tradition, quietly and completely. This process continues shaping Christmas in the present. Santa Claus, as the world knows him today, is the result of a long transformation that moved far beyond the Church's control. What began as devotion to St. Nicholas slowly blended with folklore, art, and commerce, until it became a global figure almost completely detached from theology. This change did not happen overnight, and the Church's response was never simple. At times, it resisted. At times, it adapted. In the end, it accepted that Santa had become something it could no longer govern. The earliest roots of Santa remained tied to St. Nicholas, but as Christmas moved into domestic life during the 18th and 19th centuries, that connection weakened. In different regions, Nicholas merged with local gift-bringers, winter spirits, and folk characters. In the Netherlands, Sinterklaas travelled by boat and rewarded children. In German-speaking regions, figures like Christkind or Father Christmas took shape. These characters weren't designed by Rome. They grew from popular imagination responding to seasonal needs. The major shift came with mass media and commerce in the 19th century. Poems, illustrations, and advertisements reshaped the gift-giver into a friendly, magical figure. The famous image of Santa as a round, cheerful man in red clothing was not ancient. It was refined through illustrations and later advertising campaigns. By the late 19th century, Santa no longer looked like a bishop. He looked like a symbol of abundance and warmth. This image spread faster than any sermon ever could. The Church reacted with concern. Santa threatened to overshadow the Nativity. Children became more excited about gifts than worship. Clergy warned against forgetting Christ in Christmas. Some attempted to push St. Nicholas back into focus. Others emphasized teaching children the difference between legend and faith. But the more Santa spread, the harder it became to contain him. Over time, the Church adjusted. Rather than fight a losing battle, it reframed Santa as a cultural figure rather than a religious rival. In Catholic teaching, Santa became a harmless symbol of generosity, while Christ remained the center of worship. This was a pastoral compromise. Rejecting Santa entirely risked alienating families. Accepting him without guidance risked diluting belief. The uneasy truce allowed both to exist in parallel. What makes Santa powerful is that he operates outside doctrine. He does not require belief in theology. He requires belief in kindness and reward. That simplicity allowed him to cross borders, religions, and cultures. By the 20th century, Santa had become global, carried by movies, songs, and marketing. In many places, he arrived where Christianity never had deep roots. Christmas followed him, stripped of doctrine, but full of emotion. The Vatican today rarely speaks strongly against Santa. Silence became strategy. The Church understood that opposing Santa would make him stronger. Instead, it continues to present Christmas as a season with layers. Faith for those who believe. Tradition for those who do not. Santa fits into the second layer. This transformation shows how Christmas evolves beyond authority. The Church could define doctrine, but it could not control imagination. Santa's makeover reveals that belief and culture do not move at the same speed. When culture runs faster, institutions must adapt or be left behind. The uneasy truce between Santa and the Church reflects that reality. Christmas became big enough to hold both mystery and marketing, and once that happened, no single authority could ever fully claim it again. Christmas has often been presented as a season of peace, but history shows that its language has repeatedly been pulled far from the manger and into the center of war and politics. The phrase "peace on earth," drawn from the Gospel of Luke, carries emotional power that leaders have learned to use. From medieval kings to modern states, Christmas imagery has been used to soften conflict, justify action, or momentarily suspend violence without changing its causes. The holiday became a tool, not because its message was false, but because it was powerful. One of the most famous examples is the Christmas truce during the First World War in the year 1914. Along parts of the Western Front, soldiers laid down weapons, shared food, sang carols, and buried the dead together. This moment is often remembered as proof of Christmas spirit overcoming war. What is less discussed is how quickly military command discouraged such actions. High-ranking officers feared that shared humanity weakened discipline. Christmas peace was allowed only when it could not threaten control. Governments have long used Christmas language in propaganda. During wars, leaders spoke of fighting to protect families and sacred seasons. Messages framed conflict as necessary so future Christmases could be peaceful. Posters, speeches, and broadcasts used nativity imagery to humanize political goals. Peace on earth became something promised after victory, not something practiced in the present. The Vatican has also navigated this tension. Popes have issued Christmas messages calling for peace during times of war. These appeals carried moral weight, but limited political force. While the Church emphasized reconciliation, nations continued fighting. Christmas speeches became rituals of hope, rather than instruments of change. They comforted civilians, but rarely altered strategy. Christmas has also been used diplomatically. Ceasefires, prisoner exchanges, and humanitarian pauses are often timed around the holiday. These gestures signal goodwill without requiring long-term commitment. They allow leaders to appear compassionate while maintaining power. Peace becomes symbolic, temporary, and controlled. This pattern reveals something uncomfortable. Christmas language can be separated from action. Peace on earth becomes an image rather than a demand. The holiday offers emotional release in violent times, which can reduce pressure for real change. After the song's end, war resumes. Modern politics continues this tradition. Leaders appear in Christmas broadcasts framed by trees and lights, while conflicts continue elsewhere. The contrast is striking. Warm imagery masks harsh reality. Christmas becomes a momentary lens that reshapes perception without reshaping policy. None of this means the message of peace is meaningless. It means it is contested. Christmas holds a moral standard that exposes hypocrisy when misused. The manger represents vulnerability, not power. When leaders weaponize its language, they reveal how far politics stands from that ideal. Understanding this history matters because it shows how symbols travel. Christmas did not remain in church walls. It entered battlefields, speeches, and screens. Its message was repeated so often that it could be bent without breaking. The Vatican does not emphasize this aspect of Christmas because it complicates the story. Peace sounds simple. History is not. Christmas stands as both a promise and a mirror, reflecting humanity's desire for peace and its repeated failure to live up to it. In the 20th century, the Vatican made one of the most significant changes to Christmas worship since late antiquity, not by changing the date or the message, but by reshaping how the liturgy itself functioned. For centuries, Christmas Mass followed a structure that emphasized ritual mystery, sacred language, and priestly mediation. By the modern era, that approach was no longer reaching people shaped by education, mass media, and rapid social change. The Church recognized that if Christmas was to remain meaningful, worship had to speak more clearly and involve the people more directly. This shift reached its turning point during the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. One of the Council's central goals was liturgical reform. The Vatican did not see this as abandoning tradition, but as restoring earlier Christian priorities that had been buried under layers of custom. Christmas became a testing ground for these reforms, because it attracted both devoted believers and occasional churchgoers. If people only came once a year, the message needed to be understandable. One of the most visible changes was language. Latin, once the universal voice of the Mass, was gradually replaced by local languages. This transformed Christmas worship overnight. People could now hear the nativity readings and prayers in words they actually understood. Scripture moved to the center. The story of Jesus' birth was no longer something performed at the altar. It was something proclaimed to the assembly. This was a deliberate decision. The Vatican wanted Christmas to teach, not just impress. Participation also became central. The congregation was no longer a silent audience. Responses, singing, and shared prayer became normal. Christmas carols, once considered optional or cultural, were embraced as part of worship. Music was chosen to reinforce Scripture rather than overshadow it. The goal was pastoral clarity. People needed to know why they were there. The structure of the Christmas season was also clarified. Advent was emphasized as preparation rather than early celebration. The Christmas season was extended beyond a single day, reinforcing reflection rather than spectacle. These reforms aimed to slow down a holiday that modern culture was speeding up. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Some felt that mystery was lost when everything was explained. Others missed the sense of distance that older rituals created. The Vatican acknowledged these tensions but continued forward. It believed that Christmas had to speak to living people, not only to inherited forms. What is often overlooked is how carefully these reforms were framed. The Vatican did not present them as innovation, but as return. Early Christian worship had emphasized scripture, community, and understanding. In that sense, modern Christmas liturgy was presented as older than medieval custom. These changes reveal how the Vatican adapts when necessary. Christmas worship was not frozen in time. It was reshaped to preserve meaning. By rewriting the liturgy, the Church attempted to protect the core of Christmas from becoming empty ritual or pure nostalgia. Today, Christmas Mass looks familiar, but its structure is modern. The readings, the language, and the emphasis on participation are the result of deliberate reform. The Vatican does not hide this history, but it rarely highlights how much change was required. Christmas survived the 20th century not by resisting modernity, but by translating itself into it, ensuring that the message of the Nativity could still be heard in a world that had learned to stop listening. Every December, familiar images return. A gentle Mary, a quiet Joseph, a baby wrapped in cloth. These figures feel simple and comforting, but beneath them lies some of the most complex theology Christianity has ever developed. Christmas preaching often softens these ideas, focusing on warmth and family. What gets lost is that the Nativity is not meant to be sentimental. It is meant to be disruptive. The Vatican knows this, but it rarely leads with doctrine when emotion works more smoothly. At the center of Christmas theology is the idea of incarnation. This means that God did not merely send a message or a prophet. God became human. This belief took centuries to define clearly. Early Christians debated it fiercely. Councils in the 4th and 5th centuries argued over whether Jesus was fully divine, fully human, or something in between. Christmas quietly carries the outcome of those debates. When Christians say God with us, they are repeating a conclusion that once divided empires. Mary's role is also far deeper than popular images suggest. She is not just a mother figure. In Catholic theology, she represents obedience, undoing disobedience. Early church writers compared her to Eve. Where Eve's choice led to sin entering the world, Mary's consent allowed redemption to begin. This is why her words matter so much in Scripture. "Let it be done to me according to your word" is not a gentle phrase. It is a theological turning point. Joseph's presence carries meaning too. He represents lawful protection and quiet faith. He is not emphasized because he speaks, but because he acts. His acceptance of Mary challenges social norms and legal expectations of his time. Christmas preaching often reduces him to a background figure, but theology sees him as a model of trust without full understanding. Christmas also assumes a darker doctrine that is rarely mentioned openly. The birth of Jesus matters because humanity is believed to be broken. Without the idea of original sin, the Nativity loses its urgency. The baby in the manger is not just a symbol of love. He is presented as the beginning of repair. This is why Christmas is inseparable from Easter in theology. Birth points toward death and resurrection. Redemption begins in vulnerability. The Vatican understands that these ideas are heavy. Modern audiences resist talk of sin and judgment, especially during holidays. So preaching often emphasizes peace, kindness, and hope. These are true, but they are not the whole picture. The deeper message is that Christmas claims the world needs saving and cannot save itself. This gap between doctrine and storytelling creates misunderstanding. People feel attached to Christmas, but unaware of what it asserts about reality. The Church allows this tension because belief can grow slowly. But the cost is that many never hear what Christmas actually means in theological terms. Understanding this does not require agreement. It requires honesty. Christmas is not just about a baby. It is about claims concerning God, humanity, and history. The Nativity is presented as the moment when the divine enters human limitation to confront sin from within. That idea is radical, not cozy. The Vatican rarely frames Christmas this starkly in public settings, because doctrine without context can repel. Yet, beneath every carol and creche lies this deeper structure. Mary, Joseph, and the child are not characters in a seasonal story. They are carriers of theology, shaped by centuries of debate. Christmas feels gentle because its hardest truths are spoken softly, waiting for those who listen beyond the surface. Christmas feels ancient, simple, and settled. But history shows something far more complex. What we call Christmas is not a single origin story preserved intact from the early church. It is a living tradition shaped by theology, empire, reform, conflict, and culture. Every chapter of its past reveals layers added over time, each responding to human needs, political realities, and changing beliefs. When Christmas is unmasked, it does not collapse. It becomes more honest. The birth of Jesus was not celebrated at first. Dates were debated. Meanings were argued. Rome shaped the calendar. Councils shaped doctrine. The Church chose certain paths not to deceive, but to survive and unify. Christmas absorbed existing rhythms, symbols, and expectations, because faith does not grow in empty space. It grows inside culture. The Vatican guided this process, sometimes carefully, sometimes imperfectly, often reacting rather than commanding. Over centuries, Christmas carried different roles. It was a theological statement about incarnation. It was a political marker of loyalty. It was a social release during harsh winters. It was a battleground during reform. It was a national symbol. It was a family ritual. Each age reshaped it without fully erasing what came before. This is why Christmas can feel contradictory, sacred and commercial, quiet and loud, ancient and modern. All of it is true. The idea that the Vatican is hiding a secret origin of Christmas misses the real story. The truth is more complicated and more human. Christmas was negotiated, adapted, defended, and sometimes resisted. It survived because it was flexible. When challenged, it changed form. When threatened, it rooted itself deeper in memory and habit. Institutions can influence traditions, but they cannot fully control them once people make them their own. Modern media completed a shift that had been building for centuries. Images, music, and commerce now shape Christmas more powerfully than sermons. The Church no longer defines the season alone. It shares it with governments, corporations, families, and screens. Yet the core story remains present, even when faint. A birth, a promise, a claim that meaning can enter the world quietly. Understanding this history does not require abandoning Christmas. It invites maturity. Traditions do not lose value because they have a past shaped by power and compromise. They gain depth. Christmas becomes richer when we see it as a conversation across time, rather than a frozen moment. The Vatican rarely presents Christmas this way because complexity does not fit celebration. People prefer simple stories during hard seasons. But history does not disappear because it is ignored. It waits. Christmas endures because it reflects humanity itself, searching, adapting, remembering, forgetting, repeating. It is not pure because nothing human ever is. It is meaningful because it has been carried, argued over, reshaped, and loved across centuries. When the lights fade and the noise quiets, what remains is not a myth to expose, but a tradition still in motion. Christmas is not finished. It never was. And that may be the most honest thing about it today.